Awesome. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar with our guest, Andy. As we just kind of wait for a couple minutes as people trickle in, I'd love to just kind of get to know all of you guys. If you can, please, in the chat box, write your name, where you're from, introduce yourself, what time is it there? Andy and I would love to get to kind of meet you in these next couple minutes before we get started. But yeah, I see Bill is already typing. The chat box is going to be on your right, so feel free to kind of just type in there. You could even just say hello, hi. But yeah, we love to get to meet you. Doug says, hi, Andy.
If that's the Doug I know, hello back.
Doug Sackett. And then
Oh,
Bill.
yeah. Hello, Doug. Thanks for joining, Doug.
And then we have Bill Allison here from Ontario, Canada, 4 p.m. Nice. Facility manager. Awesome. Great to meet you, Bill. We have Shelton from Alabama, Diego. Hello. 4 p.m. Eastern time. Nice. Awesome. We're just going to wait about 1 more minute for people to trickle in, but feel free to keep introducing yourselves. Wow, Diego from Venezuela. Hello. What time is it there? Oh, Doug says, always glad to learn from the best with a capital B.
Oh, I can see Doug's nose growing from here.
Oh, too humble, Andy, too humble. 4 p.m. Oh, wow, it's 4 p.m. for all of you guys. That's cool. Ahmed says, hi, Andy. Hi, Ahmed. Nice to see you again. Awesome. We're going to go ahead and get started now. Welcome, everyone. My name is Chelsea, and I'm a community admin in the Maintenance Community Slack group, which is a community of over 3,900 maintenance and reliability professionals, and we are only growing. We hold a ton of discussions. We host live webinars like this one with industry experts like Andy himself. We share resources. We give away tons of prizes, literally thousands of dollars worth of prizes, and so much more. So please join us if you haven't already in this free community. I believe Joanne is going to be sending a link to the community in the chat box. So feel free to copy and paste that once this webinar is over. And I'm really stoked for today's webinar. We have Andy Gager, who's the CEO of AMG International Consulting, and he'll be speaking on the topic of transitioning your program from reactive to preventive maintenance. But before I pass the mic to him, I just want to go over some housekeeping. So we are recording this webinar, and the recording will be available and on demand as soon as we end our session. So you'll be receiving an email with the link to access this webinar anywhere and anytime. Also, at the end of the presentation, if we have some time, Andy will answer some questions that you might have. So at the right side of your screen, you should see a chat box. Some of you guys are already familiar with it. And in the chat, you can submit any questions that you might have throughout the webinar, and Andy will try to go over as many questions as he can at the very end if there's time. So yeah, I think I covered everything. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Andy to kick us off.
Oh, Chelsea, thank you. As always, awesome job. I truly do appreciate it, as I do appreciate everybody joining us today and taking the time out of their lives, corona-free, I hope, to join us today. So, as Chelsea said, today's discussion is really going to be, well, it's transitioning your program from reactive to preventive. And I don't think there's going to be anything earth-shattering that I'm going to share with everybody, but a lot of this is sort of common sense. But I do know that there are some individuals on the call today that have attended some of my training programs, and they know that I like to tell stories. So that's actually how we're going start today's session is with a story. So a little bit about my background. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on here, but I was obviously in the private industry for a number of years, worked my way up through different manufacturing companies. I was a global distribution warehousing manager. I was a director of global sourcing. I was a plant manager for a number of years. I actually owned a microbrewery before microbreweries became, the new thing to do. But anyways, I've worked all around the world with some well-known companies and some not well-known companies. But again, I've put this list of these companies up here primarily to say, look, there's a lot of different industries on here. There's aluminum and steel, and there's automotive, and there's food and beverage, and pharmaceutical, and things like that. But really what I put this up here for is, and by the way, L'Oreal Cosmetics is on there. At that facility, I learned how lipstick is made. So that's why I forbid my wife from wearing lipstick. But anyways, there is no difference of any of those organizations listed there. Their end product, of course, is different, but every one of those organizations, and yours included, were asset intensive. So we need to make sure that we're managing those assets, because whatever your position is, or whatever you view your organization is, those are money making machines. And that's why we're in business. So the goal here then is to get out of that reactive mode and get it more into the proactive or the preventive maintenance. So that's why, really, the primary reason why I put this slide in there. So today, this is what we're going to talk about. The story time. I'm gonna call it the Hatfields versus the McCoys, because it really was like that. And then, excuse me, understanding the process to get out of the reactive and get into the proactive or the preventive, and which is not an easy task. I mean, we are not going to transition overnight to that state. So I'm going to make a couple suggestions, a couple tools that we can use at our disposal to help us along that journey. And then I'm going to show you a slide that I've shown for many, many years of what potentially, if we stay the course, potentially what could we reap from transitioning to that state. Okay, so the Hatfields versus the McCoys. This took place a number of years ago. I was asked to come in and do an assessment at a company here in the United States. It was a 2-week assessment, and this was an automotive part supplier. The plant had about 250 people there. I was asked to come in and do an assessment on the maintenance processes, their work management processes. That was why I was there for 2 weeks. But it didn't take very long for me to understand that there were far deeper issues than the maintenance group, which I'll talk about. They were very reactive. They had a dismal on-time delivery performance, which manifested itself into these internal conflicts. And anybody familiar with the automotive industry, shutting down an automotive line, a Honda or Toyota or a Chrysler or whoever, shutting down an automotive line is not an option. You do whatever you got to do to keep that supply of materials, feeding that production line. So they were very reactive. Their overtime at this particular facility was totally outrageous. and the interest of the byproduct of that is, those individuals that work in that environment, they tend to live on those, 60 or 70-hour paychecks versus, a 40-hour paycheck or 45-hour paycheck. And once we start looking at moving from reactive to a proactive, that cuts into overtime, and that's translated into, you're taking food off of my table. That's sometimes the mentality of some of these individuals that live on overtime. Because the plant was in such a reactive state, the plant manager was putting pressure on everybody to improve. The issue here was they didn't exactly know how to do that. So I show up at the plant, and the customary, I took a tour of the facility, walked around and met a couple of the key players, and then the plant manager asked if I would please join them for their their daily staff meetings. So I showed up Monday morning and went through this, and I attended the morning staff meeting. Tuesday I went in, and again, I was here for 2 weeks. Tuesday I showed up and attended the staff meeting. And in that staff meeting, the production or operations manager and the maintenance manager got into I'm going to say a discussion. And that was it. So they got into a discussion about, this is what you're doing, this is what I'm doing, and blah, blah. And that was fine. The meeting ended. And then Wednesday morning, I went into the meeting, the staff meeting, and the maintenance manager came into the meeting and said that he was way too busy to attend because operations, I won't use the exact same words that he used, but operations broke the equipment and he can't stay in the meeting because he needs to go out and address the issue that just occurred. So that was on Wednesday. Thursday, I attended the staff meeting, and it all broke loose. It all broke loose at that point. We started the meeting as we normally do, and there was some issues with some equipment out there, and all of a sudden, the operations manager and the maintenance manager, it became a screaming match. To be honest with you, for me, being an outsider to sit in that meeting, it was actually pretty uncomfortable for me to be in that meeting, to hear these two grown men going after each other, calling each other names, and accusing the other person, of sabotaging or whatever, their issue was. And that's it. The meeting ended and they stormed out and they went on their own ways. And after that meeting, I went into the plant manager's office, and we were going to talk about what I was going to do to do that day. And part of that day and part of my activities that day was going to be doing some interviews with some of the maintenance staff and some of the operations group. And at the end of the meeting, I mentioned to the plant manager, I said, boy, there's obviously some conflict going on between, the operations manager and the maintenance manager, because it looked like those two were going to jump across the table and strangle each other. And the plant manager said, I know it's been going on for a while. Those two just don't get along with each other. And quite honestly, if they ever saw each other outside of the facility, then pretty sure that meeting would come to a fisticuffs and they would kill each other. And jokingly around, and I say this, I said, what would be funny would be swap them, make the maintenance manager the operations manager, and make the operations manager the maintenance manager. And I was joking. I honestly, I was joking about it. I was like, it'd be funny if the other person walked in the other person's shoes to see what was really going on. That was on Thursday. Monday morning, the following week, as I said, I was there for 2 weeks. Monday morning, when we were attending the meeting, the morning staff meeting, the plant manager announced that he was swapping positions, and he was now moving the maintenance manager over to the operations manager position, and vice versa. The operations manager was now going to become the maintenance manager. And I wish I took a picture or a video of the reactions because this was sprung on them. They did not know this was happening. So it was sprung on them in this staff meeting that this organizational change was going to take place. And to be honest with you, I was in shock because, again, I was only joking around. And later on, when I talked to this plant manager, he said, you know what, I started thinking about what you said over the weekend, and he said, it made perfect sense. He said, the one person needs to walk in the other person's shoes to understand truly what's going on, because my operations group just doesn't understand what maintenance does and vice versa, okay? So they did, and it was a very interesting second week to be at that plant. A lot of moaning, a lot of groaning among the two guys. I left the plant before I fully saw this to fruition about what happened, but I did follow up on this. Turns out that's exactly what was needed for these two individuals, is they needed to walk in the other person's shoes. They needed to understand what the issues were from both sides of the group. And they eventually did, by the way, they eventually did wind up switching back to their original positions, but they all of a sudden became cohesive group between the operations and the maintenance group. And gosh, I wish I was there when all of a sudden they came together and they held hands and they sang Kumbaya, because that would have been pretty amazing to see that transition. And then it wasn't until then that all of a sudden this facility started clicking and started moving from the reactive to the more towards the plan. They settled the unpredictability, all right, of meeting their customer orders, and they weren't working so much overtime. And so that's a little bit about the transition that I'm talking about, is sometimes these adversarial relationships between operations and maintenance. And you're going to see, I think, coming up here, not necessarily this slide, but you're going to see that when I do conduct some of my trainings and in-house trainings, you know, I do ask the question, you know, who do you get your paycheck from? And who do you get your paycheck from? And inevitably, we all get the paycheck from the same company. So look, we're in this thing together. This slide that I'm showing right now, I've used this for a number of years now. This slide right now is not from the facility I was just talking about, but it is from another facility that was exactly the same situation. Now, there were three major events that occurred on this graph, okay? The first quarter of this graph, okay, the plant manager understood that we need to take care of our assets. And you can see that reflective. So there's the dark blue line is the PM compliance. And then the pink line, if you will, is the unscheduled downtime. And things went along pretty good there for, a couple of years, if you notice. Then there was a significant event that happened on May of 2003. And that significant event was a change in leadership. So the previous plant manager was moved to a new position. A new plant manager was brought in. And I think you could probably figure out what that plant manager's strategy was as far as conducting PMs and doing his PDM. And their number one priority was produce. Okay. And by doing that, they were then producing more product than they had ever done before. But you could see what happened with that philosophy on maintenance strategies and taking care of the assets. The PM strategy or the PM compliance went woefully down. You don't shut that equipment down for anything. Their unscheduled downtime went significantly up. And then there was another event that occurred about 3 years later, towards the end of 2006, and that event was a new plant manager. Now, this is when I showed up, and this new plant manager was, well, anybody the age of 50 is a punk in my view, all right? But he was a 30-year-old or 30-year-old engineer who was on that fast track. You know, they had pegged him already to be a fast tracker, and he had great plans in his future and things. So he took over the plant. The previous plant manager, whose philosophy on PMs and PDM and being more reactive, that individual, of course, got promoted within the corporation and now become head of all of the divisions for operations, because that plant had never produced so much product before. So therefore, that translates into you must be an awesome manager and an operations manager. This poor person that came in as a plant manager, he inherited a bunch of dogs. Unscheduled downtime was off the charts, as you can see here. It was in the 70s. They couldn't meet customer demand. They couldn't meet their delivery dates. They were in a total reactive state, okay? And their PM program was in the dumper. And I remember going to this site and I asked them, by the way, this graph right here that I'm showing you, this was the most powerful graph that I accidentally created. I would love to sit here and tell you I am absolutely brilliant. This is exactly what I meant to do when I created this graph, but that's not true. Okay, what happened was I was at this facility doing an assessment. I was talking to the maintenance planner and I talked about their PM compliance, and his response was, I remember when we used to do PMs and PDM work, which of course raises the question of, okay, why aren't we doing PMs, and why aren't we doing some of the predictive type of work that we were doing? Because clearly we were doing it. So he gave me the data, and that's how I graphed this. And as soon as I graphed it, I saw this, and I went down the hallway to the operations department, and I went and talked to their production control supervisor. And I asked him, are you tracking unscheduled downtime? Yes, that's one of our KPIs. So he gave me the data. I graphed that. That's how this graph came about. And as soon as we graphed the two groups, I mean, you can see this clearly we are in a reactive mode, and we will never get out of it unless we do something significantly different. So when I showed this graph to the new plant manager, he immediately called his staff together, showed this graph, and said, we are now got a different strategy that we're going to put in place. We are now going to return to our PM program, to our predictive. We're going to look at our lubrication programs, because a significant amount of their downtime was because of their poor lubrication, or maybe I should say lack of lubrication program. So this was an incredibly powerful graph and shows you, what the impact of reactive maintenance is about. When we start going down this journey from moving, and again, I was a plant manager, so when I walked into my plant initially, I was hired by an organization, and I had one of two choices. I was brought in to say, look, can we salvage this company, or based on your recommendation, are we going to shut this operation down? And so when I walked in there, they were in a bad shape. Yeah, very bad shape. So we need to do things significantly different. Okay, and part of that is this right here. Now, this comes directly out of our SMRP um, materials right here, but the three most significant constraints when moving from reactive to proactive, okay, and developing our maintenance and reliability organization then is one, the culture, and then two, the people, and then the third, of course, is going to be the resources. So the culture is what is the organization's values, their beliefs, and their behaviors. That first one goes exactly back to how I started today's session with, oh my gosh, the culture at that facility that I was in was so hostile that it was uncomfortable for me to even be in that organization, that facility. And I think some of you can relate to that. It was very adversarial. And so the number one thing is we need to take a step back and understand what is the culture of the organization. From there, we then look at, all right, do we have, for those are familiar with the book Good to Great, do we have the right people on the right bus in the right seat on that bus? And one of the things I talk about when I facilitate the leadership and supervision training is, look, not everybody wants to be a supervisor. Not everybody is made out to be a supervisor. Sometimes we put people into positions that they're not comfortable or they're not qualified for. When I first became, a very long time ago, when I first became a supervisor, I was called in on a Friday afternoon, which is the worst time to call somebody into the office on Friday afternoon. But they then told me that I was going to be promoted to a supervisor. I had no formal training. I didn't know how to, well, first of all, let me back up. I was part of this department. Now all of a sudden, I'm now the supervisor of that department. Nobody taught me or trained me on how to now convert from being a coworker to being a supervisor. So that was a difficult, to be honest with you, that was difficult for me because, of course, I wanted to be friends. I still want to be friends with these individuals, right? Nobody told me it's okay to be friendly, but you cannot be friends now with people you supervise. But do I have the right people in the right positions to be successful? The third one there then is the resources. Does the organization have the right skill set then to execute our strategies and our policies to achieve our objective and our strategic plans, which I'll talk about in one moment. But again, do we have the right skill set? And I've done a couple webinars on this right now. I can pretty much draw every maintenance department in the world, and that's 20, 40, 30, and 10. Okay, now again, you could debate with me on my percentages, but I bet I'm pretty close. Let's keep the math simple, okay, for this one right here. If I have 10 people in my maintenance department, I'm willing to bet you that 2 of the 10, 20%, are superstars. They're awesome at what they do. They know it. They got the skill set. They can take a potato and a rubber band and a paper clip, and by gosh, they can make a 12-gauge shotgun out of the thing. Okay, they're that good, right? Then I got another 40%. The next 40% are the next 4 individuals that are very good at what they do. They come in every day, they do their job, they do it well, and then at the end of the day, they go home, okay, and they do it again tomorrow. I love that group. They're dependable, they do a job, and they do it well. Then I got 30%, another 3 individuals then of that group that perhaps they don't have the right, well, I'm not going to say the right skill. That's not the right word I want to use. They may not have the experience. They certainly aren't 20%ers, and they haven't quite achieved the 40% range, right? But they have potential, okay? And I want to work with those individuals to of course elevate them to the next plateau. And then every organization in the world has a 10%er. Every group, and I'm not going to really go into a deep dive, but I think everybody on this webinar understands what I mean by a 10%er. Okay, I call them the bottom feeders, to be honest with you. Every fiber in their body is negative. They're complainers. Well, again, I'll leave it alone at that. The interesting thing is supervisors, as supervisors and managers, we wind up spending about 90% of our time with that group, which is, we should be spending time doing other things with that group, but that's a different discussion. Okay, so do I have the right resources with the right skill set to execute our policies and our objectives and our strategies? So when we try transitioning out of that reactive environment, okay, these are a couple of things that we need to probably have in place, and I strongly recommend that these are the strategies or steps that we put in place to transition away from the reactiveness. What is the strategic plan? So those familiar with the ISO 55000 standard, that's exactly one of the elements of it, is what is our strategy? Okay, so our strategy plan, it does include the processes for determining both the short term and the long term. Look, I was guilty of this. I will be straightforward and I will be honest with you. When I was a plant manager, I was so short-term focused. In my daily meetings, I would look at our operations department and I would say, what were our numbers today? All right, what are the numbers for the week? How are we looking for the month? Okay, because I was so focused on our P&L statement that I didn't really care about the long term. All right, I wish I knew then what I know now, but we need to understand what is our strategic planning for both the short term and the long term. And when we're developing and presenting those strategic plans to the stakeholders, now we have to gain the trust of the stakeholders. Now, I came up through the shop floor, okay? Whenever a new edict came down from the leadership team that impacted me personally, it was hard for me to translate that. It's a lot of you understand this thing called WIFM, okay? What's in it for me? And how is this change going to impact my daily life? The number one motivator for employees is trust, okay? In other words, do I trust that my supervisor, manager, or whoever I report to, do I trust that they have my back? Do I trust that they have our best interest? And it's incredible how motivated employees can be when they achieve a certain level of trust with their, I guess, to their direct report. Can't underestimate or diminish the importance of the second bullet there, the communication plan. I joke around a lot of times. My wife and I celebrated our 39th wedding anniversary last September, and I said we've been happily married for 7 years. And it's because I learned how to communicate with my wife. But developing a communication plan, all right, so the what, the when, who's going to deliver it, what's the message that we want to deliver, clearly define roles and responsibilities. And again, that's a whole nother topic right there when we're looking at roles and responsibilities. I'm a strong advocate of RACI charts. For those familiar with RACI charts, responsible, accountable, communicator or support, depending which one you use, and then who needs to be informed. I am a strong advocate of that because it takes away the grayness of our roles and responsibilities. It's black and white. If you have an R next to your name, you're responsible. Okay, and then part of that communication plan is the frequency of it, who's going to deliver it, and then what's very important is when we are rolling out any changes, we have to communicate that. What is the schedule? When is going to take place? What are the activities? Nobody likes to be blindsided. You know, all of a sudden they come in Monday morning and all of a sudden things are changed. Nobody likes that. That's when you start getting resistance. So we need to understand, we have to understand that. How is this going to impact individuals' daily lives? From that strategic plan, we then need to implement that. And so when we're developing these strategic plans and these initiatives, okay, that's where culture comes in. Okay, so we need to understand that by doing some of these things, and this is how part of our communication is, how is this going to impact it? What's that proverbial light at the end of the tunnel? And therefore, we're going to transition the entire organization then into focusing on asset reliability. And then, of course, the last bullet there is we need to measure it. You know, whatever we did, is that delivering the results that we intended it to do? So, you know, some of the best performing organizations that I've worked with, you know, they're a culture of 5 why. Okay, and operators, I'm going to go back to my operations side of the business as well. Operators know their equipment. They know it. They use 4 of their 5 senses, and you know, they can hear it, they can see it, they can touch it, they can hear it. I hope they're not licking their equipment, but you know, you never know. But we're dependent on that frontline operator to identify, hey, look, there's something wrong with this equipment. Okay, breakdown does not mean break time. Okay, that's part of culture. It's very important when we're transitioning that everybody. Here's another way to say it. I have never met an operator in my entire career that comes into their facility first thing in the morning or on the off shifts or whenever their start of their shift is. I have never heard an operator ever say, gosh, I hope my equipment runs like crap today, right? A good day to them or a good shift to them is they come in, they turn the equipment on, and it does whatever it's supposed to do. They're not struggling with their equipment all night or all day long. And at the end of their shift, they can turn it off and they can go home and they can self-medicate. That's a good day. That's a great day. Okay. So look, here's some of the tools that we can use to help us transition. Now, I am not going to, for 1 minute, say this is an exhaustive list. These are just some suggestions right here, okay? Number 1, schedule compliance. I showed you that graph, okay, with the PM and the PDM compliance. Start with making sure operations meets their requirements and their agreement with the maintenance group to allow the time to perform the maintenance, the proper maintenance. Everybody here has heard this, all right? We have time to do it over again. So it's very important that when we're building our weekly schedules, that we are melding the 2 schedules together. Here's our operation schedule and here's our maintenance schedule. Okay, and then that's when we have this agreement between the 2 groups that, yep, this is next week's schedule. We're going to lock and load it, and this is it. The bad actor list. Start documenting the failure codes, okay, or and see if we can identify some of the failure modes. Look, here's the worst thing. Stop using that thing called other. That doesn't help anybody when we're experiencing a failure. And when we're going into our CMMS system, the drop-down menu comes down, and the first one that's on the list is other, because it's very convenient for them. Rather than going down the whole list of all these failure codes, just pick other, okay? Can't do anything with that information. Create a top 10 list of those bad actors, if you will, or those frequent failures, and create the corrective actions to eliminate or mitigate those nagging stoppages. And again, this is one of the other things that I talk about. It's not the big, huge failures that are eating our lunch. It's those nagging little stoppages of the equipment that really chew us up. And so it's vitally important that we identify what is causing, those shortages, or those stoppages rather. An FMEA or a FMECA identify the true critical processes in the equipment. Now, when I go in and I start asking operation managers what's the most equipment in the plant, every single one of them, 100% of the time, their response is, well, duh, my equipment. Okay, well, that's not really true. Okay, it's true because you're responsible for that department or that equipment, but really, in the big picture, we need to identify what's the most critical equipment, what are the most critical processes, and we need to identify those failure modes and what their effect is if they manifest themselves, and how do we develop strategies to address those. If we do identify a failure that wasn't identified during the FMEA, that's what triggers some of our root cause analysis. And that's where our reliability engineers or our cross-functional teams can come in, take a look at it, analyze it, and see if we can develop a new strategy. That leads into the next one, which is our PM/PDM optimization. Organizations, and again, this is my experience, organizations do a great job adding tasks to PMs, but they do a lousy job reviewing what's the value that they add. So again, nothing really goes on to a PM. No task is really added to a PM that does not address a failure mode. Otherwise, why are we doing that task? The next one is Kaizens, which I love. Actually, the next 3 bullets I love. It is a Japanese term that means continuous improvement. Okay, it's a business philosophy regarding the processes that continuously improve our operations. So there, again, that's almost part of our culture. Part of our culture then also includes this thing of getting operators more involved in getting into this thing called TPM. It's designed, all right, to disseminate the responsibilities. So we're having operators do more of the, we call it type 1, type 2, or level 1, level 2 type maintenance. Some of you might be familiar with the acronym CLARE, clean, lubricate, adjust, inspect, and minor repairs. That's part of our TPM philosophy. But again, that gets the operators more involved with their equipment, okay, and how to maintain that equipment. And then finally, one of the things that I absolutely love, and it is my personal favorite, is Gemba, or conducting Gemba walks, all right? We can't lead organizations by sitting in our office. So get out of the office, get out of the front office, get out on the shop floor, get out into the field, understand where the value is being created, which is the definition of Gemba. Go to the place of value, talk to the operators, talk to the maintenance group, do a daily walk, all right, and understand it. Get more in tune with what's going on. This will pay huge dividends. And by the way, that also, okay, that also builds trust within the group, okay? If they see leadership out on the floor, talking to individuals, listening to some of their suggestions or some of their complaints, okay, because a lot of these things can turn into gripe sessions, but at least they're there and they can listen and they can understand. And believe it or not, some of the greatest suggestions comes out of the shop floor, not out of leadership. And I think some of you will understand what I'm talking about. So, look, this is, as I started today's session off, this is not going to happen overnight. Okay, this is going to be a journey. This is, as some people, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. Okay, I get that. And I, again, this is one of those slides that I've used for the last number of years right here. The first bullet there, repair expenses increased by 30% in the first 12 months, 12 to 18 months. What that means is once we start doing all these other things that I just showed you about, looking at PM optimization, looking at doing some of these other activities that I talked about. That's going to take some money. And all that money is doing is getting our assets back up to what we call asset health or like new condition. So if I went into your facility and I showed leadership this first bullet and said, trust me, your repair expenses are going to increase by 30% over the first year, I'm pretty sure that they would be escorting me out the door within a couple minutes. Okay. But this is what I go back to. What's the short-term and the long-term vision? What's the short-term, long-term strategies? If leadership can build a strong cocoon around both operations and the maintenance department and allow them to do the right things, look at what happens potentially. Expenses decline 68% below the original levels, all right? Now, there's some information out there that says a third of the maintenance expenses are wasted dollars. So you're throwing good dollars at poor repairs. That's what I talked about as far as saying we got time to do it over again. Okay, now look at that, 68%. Machinery breakdowns decline 50 to 60%. That's our mean time between failures. Machinery downtime declines 60 to 80%. That's our mean time to repair. Spare parts inventories decline 20 to 35%. Okay, we're no longer putting good money at just in case inventory. And then productivity potentially can increase by 20 to 30%. There's another OEE, or I'm sorry, there's another KPI in there called OEE potentially that they can feed into. So what would a 1% improvement to OEE financially mean to the company? So again, leadership needs to build a very strong cocoon around everybody in order to achieve these numbers. So finally, just to wrap it up right here, you see that I put a picture of silos in there. I call them functional cylinders. We have competing KPIs among the groups. Okay, we have KPIs for operations, we have KPIs for maintenance, we have KPIs for supply chain. Okay, but we're all in this together. And some of the issues, well, one of the issues I see is that some of the KPIs that we put in place are in conflict with the other ones. For example, if I look at operations, all right, one of their key KPIs might be production, okay, or throughput. And if I look at maintenance, one of their key performance indicators might be availability or reduced downtime, okay? And then I look at supply chain, and one of their key KPIs might be reduced cost. So if you think about that for 1 second, operations wants to increase this, maintenance wants to increase availability. So essentially what they want to do is they want to build a whole nother plant next door. So when this production line goes down, just flex everybody over to this group over here, right? And we'll just carry on. Supply chain, on the other hand, wants to reduce everything. So we're not going to have one of everything in the storeroom. They're trying to reduce costs. So somebody at corporate headquarters is going to go over to a foreign company or a foreign country, and they're going to find a really good price on bamboo bearings. So, hey, let's buy the bamboo bearings, all right? And therefore, I can check my KPI box and say, hey, I reduce cost, but the impact to operations and maintenance is obviously common sense there. That's not going to work. Maintenance is just like operations, okay? Both groups have resources, both groups use materials, and both groups have schedules. But both groups need to strive to meld those two schedules together to achieve our strategies and our objectives. And the three most significant constraints when developing your maintenance and reliability and transitioning from reactive to proactive: understand what the culture is and how do we deal with that culture. Do I have the right people? Do I have the right resources? And then finally, look, this is the nature of the business right here. People come and people go. That is every one of us on today's webinar. That's life, okay? People come and people go. But it's the processes that we put in place that absolutely stabilizes the entire system. That's an important bullet right there. What systems do we have in place that are going to stabilize everything? Okay. All right. That wraps that up. I am open for any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andy, for sharing just your expertise and knowledge and also some very interesting stories to our wider community. We super appreciate it. But yeah, let's dive into some questions kind of with our remaining time. We have a question here from Bill. He said, what are some strategies on how to get the whole staff to buy into the change from reactive to preventive?
Well, so I try to cover all some of that to address that question right there. But again, we're all in this together, and that goes back to what I talked about as far as culture goes. We all get the paycheck from the same company, so we're in this together. If the company is not successful, then we all fail. And again, it's not an easy. We're not going to turn that around overnight. We need, as leadership, we need to get more involved. We need to communicate what is the strategy. No, again, as I said, nobody wants to be surprised. So here's the vision, here's the strategy. I need your help to get there. And the other thing I talked about is I want leadership to be visible. I want leadership out on the shop floor so people can come and talk to them, gripe, all right, make suggestions. But again, that all leads back to the culture.
Awesome. I guess a really good follow-up question to that, and this is kind of from Heather. She asks, what are some successful ways to handle those people who might be negative or resistant to change on the team? And how do you get through to them that this shift is really important?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. I can't tell you how many people I've run into that. So we have positive influencers and then we have the negative influencers. And everybody on this call knows what I'm talking about. The negative influencers within the staff, they sometimes carry a big stick and they influence other people. Those other people won't make a move without the negative influencer saying, yep, let's go with it, or no, we won't. Those are the people that I tried finding first, because those are the hardest nuts to crack. If I can get those individuals on board with what we want to do, here's a prime example. I was working in West Texas. There was a gentleman there, excuse me, that had been working there for 30 plus years, right? And he was saying, you know, look, I've been here for 30 years. Why do I want to do something like this? Okay. And I made it a mission to convert this individual. And what I was saying to them was, look, his name was Richard, actually. I said, Richard, it's incumbent upon you. You inherited these assets when you were a rookie. When you first joined the company, you inherited these assets. Now it's incumbent upon you to leave these assets in a state of health when you walk out the door the last time. And you don't want to walk out of here for the last time to say, man, got my time in there. It's up to you, buddy, you know, to take care of it after this. So I want to find out who those negative influencers are, and I try hard to convert them. And listen, here's the reality of it. If they don't convert, I would classify them as my 10 percenters, and I'm going to deal with them differently than I would the other group. I hope that makes sense.
It did. Awesome. Great response. We have another question here. What is the most common challenge or pitfall people run into that they don't prepare for when shifting their program?
Surprise. That's exactly what I just talked about. Nobody wants to come in on Monday morning and say, surprise, we're changing everything around. That's where communication, that's why I stress the importance of communication. We cannot over stress communication. I don't think we can over communicate. And by the way, we all communicate differently. We all communicate differently. Some look, and so when I conduct trainings, I can tell you right now that 38% of the adult population does not learn by what's considered stand and deliver or classic classroom training. They're wired more for, all right, tell me the concept and then go away and let me figure it out. Okay, and if I got any questions, I'll come back to you. Same concept here. We got to tell them what it is. These are the most successful. By the way, this also goes with some of our CMMS implementations. Tell me what I got to do. Let me figure this out. Let me noodle about it. And then I want you to come back a week or two or whatever the case may be and say, hey, this is the question. Because sometimes I don't know what I don't know, and I can't even ask you intelligent questions about the changes that you're planning on making. So tell me what it is. Let me noodle over it. Let it marinate on me for a little while. And then I want you to circle back and ask me if I got any questions so we can clarify that. So it makes me feel a little bit more comfortable about what is going to happen to me personally. Again, I hope that makes sense.
It did. You are crystal clear, Andy. We got another question here, and it says, what are the marks of a successful and effective transition from reactive to preventive maintenance?
Well, that would be the KPIs that we put in place. All right. So again, I mentioned this a little bit, is what are the right KPIs to drive the behavior that we're ultimately looking for? What is the goal? What is the objectives? Now, I am not a strong advocate for having a dozen or 24 KPIs. I much prefer to say, okay, we've identified this is where we're bleeding from. This is the strategy that we're going to put in place. And this is a KPI to measure if what we did is achieving what the objective was for this change. So, you know, it all comes down to that, is are we measuring the right things? So that goes back to that one bullet I had in there about the SMART goal.
Cool. We have one more question here. I think Bill might be a little bit confused about the KPI.
Okay.
Oh, Heather clarifies saying key performance indicator. I think.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, sorry. Too many acronyms.
I know there's a lot in this industry, too many to count.
Well, all you have to do is just say, hey, I don't know what KPI is, USOB.
USOB, what does that mean?
Never mind.
Awesome.
Okay.
I think we might be at the end of all of our questions. So with that, thank you so much again, Andy, for your time. And thank you everyone here for joining us for today's webinar. Again, you'll be receiving a recording of this webinar shortly in your emails. And so yeah, just be on the lookout for that. And yeah, if you guys have any other questions, Andy is in the community. And so you could ask him anything there. But yeah, I believe that's it. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much, Andy.
Chelsea, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, again, for taking the time out of your lives to join us.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. You're getting a ton of thank yous in the chat from everybody. But yeah, awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
All right. Cheers.